Thinking of selling your home? The housing market has changed dramatically from just a few years ago. Interest rates are up, higher demand is down, and the overall housing market is about as slow as it's been in the last 3 years. Today, you can't just list your property for sale and expect multiple offers. If you want to sell your home at top dollar, you have to understand the current real estate environment. Without the right strategy, you could miss out on thousands, or worse, not sell at all. In this video, I'll break down what's changed from interest rates to buyer expectations and show you exactly what it takes to succeed in today's real estate market. Now, the goal of this video is to talk about the shift in the real estate market and help you as a seller know what you need to do to maximize price as well as time. And by that, I mean you have to forget what you've done in the past because there's a very high likelihood that those strategies have changed. So how exactly has the housing market changed? Well, it really comes down to 3 different factors that are completely different today than they were just 3 years ago, with the first one of those factors being mortgage rates. Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking because I'm talking to clients out there. You believe that mortgage rates have actually moved lower because the Fed started lowering the Fed funds rate. But in all reality, mortgage rates have actually gone up since they originally lowered by 50 basis points. And the reason for that is because the market currently believes a couple of things, whether or not they're actually true. Now, I'm not here to say whether they're true or not, but the current things driving mortgage rates higher are: 1, Trump's presidency. The market believes by Trump getting elected and by winning both the House and the Senate, that that's going to be inflationary for the market. And we all know that the Fed has actually been trying to combat inflation for the better part of 3 years. So if the market is right and inflation moves up, then there's a chance that the Fed might have to pause or even raise rates again in the future. On top of that, you have economic data coming in stronger than the market has expected, which again leads the market to believe that that soft landing that the Fed has been talking about might actually happen. And if that wasn't enough, we've actually seen the mortgage spreads between the 10-year and the 30-year fix once again move higher. So all of these things combined has led to higher mortgage rates, which in turn affects affordability, which is the second factor that I want to talk about that's changed dramatically over the last couple of years. At the moment, housing affordability is sitting at some of the worst levels that we've ever had on record, which in turn means fewer qualified buyers, leading to less buyer demand and possibly lower home prices. And the third factor that's changed is buyer sentiment. Buyers are now expecting more value and are more choosier. Is that a word? Which ultimately leads to homes sitting on the market longer, more negotiations, and when not done right, lower home prices. So with that, it's very, very important as a seller that you forget where the market was 3 years ago and focus on what's actually happening now, because that will help you maximize your price, your time, and ultimately how much money you put in your pocket. Now, I want to be very, very clear. The key to solving all of the problems that we just talked about a moment ago really comes down to mortgage rates. Lower mortgage rates improve affordability, which in turn increases buyer demand, which likely unlocks inventory and keeps the market in favor of sellers. But the reality is interest rates are likely to stay higher for longer because of all the volatility out there in the market. And while some people out there believe that Trump is the solution that could lead to lower mortgage rates, more building, better housing affordability, the reality is he doesn't even take office until mid-January. And it's very, very likely that it takes months before we see the effects of anything that's passed in office. That's why it's very, very important. If you're a seller, you need to focus on what's happening now and not what you hope is going to happen in the future. Outside of interest rates, there's also a couple of other things working against you at the moment. One is rising inventory. As more homes come on the market, that means more choices for buyers, reducing both urgency and competition. In addition to that, you also have seasonality. And at the time I filmed this video, we're headed into the slowest market of the year, which is that winter market. Now, in theory, this isn't a time of year where you should worry, but it's something that you have to keep in mind as a seller. Typically, during the winter market, there's just less buyer demand out there in general. And coupled with higher rates and lower affordability, this winter market's likely to be more extreme than we've seen in several years. And what I mean by that is just slower activity in general. So if you're someone planning to put your home on the market anytime soon, you have to realize that you're probably going to get less buyer activity than you would otherwise get just because there's less buyers in the market in general. Now, when we talk about seasonality, the winter market generally ends sometime between the second week to mid-February, which is when we lead into that spring housing market. But here's the thing. If mortgage rates continue to stay higher for longer, there's a really good chance that that spring housing market gets pushed further into the year until we see those lower mortgage rates. So with that, I want to talk about pricing strategy strategy from a seller's perspective in order to maximize price. In my opinion, the best strategy has always been to price it at what you think it's worth based on comparable sales. Now you might be thinking, well, what other way is there to price it? Well, some people like to price it high and shoot for the moon, which in this market is something you should absolutely avoid. Whereas the other strategy is you price it low. Price it at lower than what you think it's worth to get more and more eyeballs on the property, which in turn creates more demand, ultimately leading to a higher price. But here's the thing, that strategy only works really, really well when there's a lot of buyer demand out there in the market. Since buyer demand is lower at the moment, then I would rather you focus on what you want to get for the house, which leads me to tell you that you should price it realistically. Now, what do I mean realistically? Typically, as agents, we go back and look at 6 months of comparable sales to get an idea of the value of your home. I think it's really, really important at the moment you're not going back 6 months, that you're going back 2, 3 months, maybe even the most recent month, and try to find comparable properties that have recently sold with higher mortgage rates. Because if you're basing it off a market where mortgage rates were lower and buyer demand was higher, and you were in a different season altogether, chances are that means that you're going to price it higher than it otherwise should be. But rather, if you can base it off comps that have recently sold, assuming that buyer demand and mortgage rates are more or less the same, then you're going to put yourself in a better position not only to maximize price, but also maximize time on the market. Understand that time on the market is very, very important. The longer a home sits on the market, the more leverage a buyer feels like they have in negotiation. Because in a buyer's eyes, if a home's sitting on the market, that means it's overpriced. And in many, many cases, they're right. Now, in some cases, they're not, because maybe a home was under contract, it fell out and it came back on. But for the most part, if a home has been sitting on the market 60, 90 days, then chances are it's priced higher than it should be based on current market conditions. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't ultimately get your price. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't price it higher than where you think it should be, but as a real estate agent that sells a lot of property, that lists a lot of property, I think it's very, very important that you understand the market has shifted, that we're not in this strong seller's market anymore. Now, if you look at the data, it still looks like a seller's market because we don't have more than 6 months of inventory on the market, which has typically been how you decide whether or not you're in a buyer or seller's market. Now, while inventory has grown, the data still looks like a seller's market, but the reality is it's more balanced than anything else, which means as a seller, you have to expect negotiation going into the deal. Now, when I say that, I hear what you're thinking. Well, I need to price it higher to build in that negotiation, and that's the wrong approach. You should still price it based on comparable sales, but rather get an agent that can actually negotiate on your behalf. Just because I say a seller is going to negotiate doesn't necessarily mean they're going to negotiate and lowball your price. But rather what I mean, negotiations are favoring buyers a little bit more at the moment because I see buyers asking for more credits towards closing costs, towards buying down the interest rate, towards repairs on property, in some cases asking for their agent's compensation. Now, just because they're asking for these things doesn't necessarily mean you have to do them. But understand, when selling real estate, it is all about negotiation. And for the better part of 3 years, sellers didn't have to negotiate. They could just put a home on the market at basically any price, not have to do anything to the interior of it. And in many cases, not only would they receive one offer, they'd receive multiple offers, likely leading to a higher price than they had originally listed at. But here's the thing, this isn't that market. And the reason I bring this up is so that you have proper expectations. You don't have to agree with them. You don't have to agree to their negotiations. You don't have to sell at their price or give them credits or do any of that. But the reality is you're likely to see more and more of that as the market slows down. Now, you're probably watching this going, well, Jeb, why should I even sell my house at all? I'm just going to sit on it and not do anything. And if that's the right move for you, I completely understand. But also understand there's always people out there buying homes. There are homes selling every single day. Now, at the moment, there's fewer first-time home buyers out there because they're more affected by affordability, more affected by mortgage rates, by having a down payment, by all of those things. Whereas on the flip side, move-up buyers, people that have to sell a home and buy another one, are typically less impacted because they're usually coming in with a higher down payment. They've already been paying a mortgage payment and they already understand the process. And in some cases, they can put a little bit more money down and offset those higher mortgage rates. Whereas a first-time home buyer typically has a harder time doing that. Now, the reason I bring this up, because as a seller, you should expect more buyers to come in having contingencies on maybe selling another property, having contingencies on having to do things in order to sell a property or whatever, right? Because more and more buyers are probably going to be buyers that need to sell something to buy something, you have to plan accordingly as a seller, which means if you're also a seller that needs to sell your house and buy something else, it's probably really, really smart on your side to focus on selling your home first versus going out and finding a property. What I've seen a lot of recently is sellers go out and find their replacement property, a property that they absolutely love. They go under contract, they get that offer accepted with the contingency on selling their home, then they put their home on the market, and unfortunately it doesn't sell, which ultimately leads to them having to cancel the original escrow and in many cases canceling the listing on their home. So if you're someone that is consider selling, make sure you go out and look at the market that you're looking to buy in. Make sure you can find a home in that market. You find something that you're comfortable with the price point, but don't go and make offers on that property until you understand the market that you're in. Can you find a buyer on your property? What does the timing look like on that? Can you get the price that you want in order to make that other deal make sense? Because the last thing you want to do is go under contract, not be able to sell your house, it fall apart, it becomes an emotional thing, or maybe in some cases your home goes under contract, you have to pull it on the market, days go up. There's all of these different things that can happen, which can ultimately be avoided by just having the right realtor on your side to start with and help guide you through that process. Now, another thing I want to talk about that's changed considerably over the last couple of years, and I mentioned it earlier, is sellers having to do things in order to sell their home. A couple of years ago, like I said, you could put your home on the market, get multiple offers, not do anything to it. You could have multiple issues with the property. In fact, I was telling sellers at that time, don't worry about fixing these things in your home. A buyer is going to come along and make you an offer anyway because there's no inventory on the market. I told a lot of sellers at that time not to worry about fixing things in their property. Because inventory was so low, buyer demand was so high, we would still have offers on properties that needed work. And not only were we getting offers, we were getting top dollar for those properties. So it didn't make a lot of sense for a seller to go out and improve a property that was going to get top dollar anyway. But here's the thing. That's changed. And in order to sell right now at top dollar, you need to make sure that you're addressing the things that are important to buyers. Now, that doesn't mean you need to go paint your entire house inside and out or replace all the flooring or get the kitchen or bathrooms redone, but it does mean that you need to address the items that are visible, that are probably a concern for most buyers out there. Now, the last thing I want any of my clients doing is going spending money on things that aren't important to buyers. Because as a seller, you know all of the things wrong with your home, right? You see them all the time. They bother you. So those are the things that you want to address. But here's the thing. Those things might not be a problem for the next buyer. So as a buyer, you need to focus on the things that are important for most buyers out there. Because when a buyer sees issues with your home that's visible, well, they think, well, if they're not fixing the visible stuff, then what's behind the walls? What's under the house? What's in the attic? Then there's probably more and more problems that they're not taking care of. And remember, you only get one time to make a first impression. So it's very, very important that you come to the market looking the way that you want to look, not that you're going to fix things later. Because we all know that buyers are online, they're on Zillow, they're on Redfin, they're on Realtor.com, they're on all these websites looking at property, and as soon as a property hits the market, they're looking at it. And if it makes a bad first impression, chances are they're not coming back to it. Now, in some cases, that can mean not using proper photos, not doing video tours, not doing videos at all. As a seller in this market, understand most of your audience is looking online. You need to be able to attract them. How do you do that? You come on with professional photography. You have 3D tours of your property. You have video tours of your property. Remember, you're trying to attract the most eyeballs as soon as that property hits the market. So remember, the more exposure you can get, that's likely to lead to more demand, ultimately netting you a higher price. Now, one way to avoid all of the things that we've talked about today and maximize price and maximize time is by hiring the right real estate agent. As a real estate agent for over 20 years, I sell a lot of property and I see a lot of these things that can be avoided. And with that said, I would love the opportunity to personally help you if you're considering selling your home. If I can be of any assistance to you at all, whether or not you're local, do me a favor and reach out using that link below. While the market is changing and the selling process is changing, there are always things on the selling side that will never change, which I discuss in this video here.